Here we go. I think we got it fixed here. Let's wait for this to pop up in LinkedIn and we'll get going. So I'm here from Colorado again. Going to talk about some of the early sections in my book, which I call the secrets, but it's just part of what recruiting is and some of the things that you guys as job seekers may not be privy to in the entire process of job seeking. So throw some comments up. Where are you guys viewing from? Again, I'm in Colorado. We haven't really had a winter here at all. It's 68 degrees today in February, which is wild. Haven't had much snow, and I know there's a lot of snow on the East Coast. I don't know if you guys, anyone here joining from the East Coast, is in that blizzard watch. So hopefully you guys are safe and sound. All right. I will take questions and stuff. I'll try to, grab some of the comments as we go, but I wanted to specifically talk about a few of the sections in the book, as I said. And specifically, I wanted to start off with one thing that a lot of you have probably heard me talk about a lot. And this is probably, I wouldn't call it a secret, but it's probably the biggest impediment to people's job search. It's the titles, guys. It's the titles. I've told, I recognize a lot of names on here, and I know I've talked to you guys about this a lot. Your your titles have got to align with what the recruiters are looking for, what the job is. I just went over this with a candidate today. Um, we only see three titles in LinkedIn Recruiter when we search for candidates. Your last three titles. If I look on Indeed, I only see two titles, the last two titles. If your titles are not aligned with the jobs you're applying to, with the jobs you're fishing for on LinkedIn, no one's going to be reaching out to you. Recruiters are looking at those things and that's what they're going for. So make sure that those are aligned. You guys have probably all heard me say this before. Like I said, I will, if you have questions about that, please throw them in the comments. I'll try to touch on some of that stuff if you want me to. But I think most of you have heard me talk about that. So, yep, seeing some people from the East Coast, so New Jersey, New York, people from the Bay Area. Um, Crazy weather is really all I can say. All right, let me get into some of the stuff that I haven't talked about as much, either in LinkedIn posts in the past or in the last live. Some of the other things that are, I guess I categorize them as secrets in the book, are really how the recruiting process works on the back end. So let's start with permanent positions because that's really what you guys mostly are going for, right? I know some people would consider contracts. Um, if I have time, I'll get to some of the contract pieces that people may not be aware of. But on the permanent side, let's talk about agency recruiters reaching out to you, right? Because that's really what's probably going to happen that might be confusing, right? Internal corporate recruiter reaches out to you, or you apply directly to a job and you're working directly with a corporate recruiter. I think that's pretty obvious, right? You're working directly with that recruiter. They're going to present you to the hiring manager. Hope you get an interview, probably with a recruiter first, and then move on to that hiring manager and so on. But on the agency side, when you have a recruiter reach out to you and they want to submit you for a job, there's a few really important things that you have to understand and really should ask and try to figure out before you decide to move forward. So the first, believe it or not, is if that agency actually has a contract with the client in question. Well, and let me back up. First of all, they tell you the client's name. If they don't tell you the client's name, I would not allow them to submit you to the client. In my 25 years of recruiting, I've had maybe, I don't know, less than five. instances where my client has asked me to not present the name, their company name, to the candidates in the initial screening process. That could happen because the position may be a confidential search for the client. Um, a variety of reasons for that, right? I mean, maybe someone's being terminated and they don't want the name getting out there. Um, maybe they're in an IPO process or a merger process, and they again don't want the name getting out that they're hiring. There could be a couple different reasons for that. If the recruiter is not able to give you a coherent reason that they won't share the company name, personally, I wouldn't proceed. You don't know where your resume is going. I have seen too many candidates get rejected when a client gets their resume from multiple sources, right? So if you apply on your own and then an agency submits you, which you wouldn't know in this case because they didn't tell you the name, I've absolutely had clients say, you know what, we're just not going to consider that person. They're either not paying attention or they're trying to process. Um, it's not worth it, in my opinion. Where your resume is going, you can't keep track of where you've been, keep track of the types of roles you're going after. So that's number one. You want to know who the client is. Number two, once they tell you that, find out if they have an actual contract to work on that position. You will be shocked, especially in this market right now, by how many companies will do what's called a flyer or take called a flyer on a candidate. And that means they see a job posted, right? Maybe it's been open for 3 months on LinkedIn, right? You've seen these kinds of jobs. An agency will say, you know what, I'm going to try to get candidates for this job. I'm going to try to get myself onto that vendor list. So they'll go out and screen candidates. Maybe they'll post the job themselves. They might tell you who the client is, right? Hey, this is XYZ Corp. It's this position. And you're like, yes, I want to get into XYZ Corp. Submit me. They may not have a contract with XYZ Corp. They're just throwing resumes to talent acquisition, maybe to the hiring manager, trying to get a contract. Now, maybe that's okay, right? Maybe you're okay with that process, but you need to know that that's the process because you need to understand what your chances are of getting this job, right? And they're much lower if it's a flyer, by the way. Number two, a lot of clients don't like that, to be perfectly honest with you. I've run into lots of corporate recruiters, lots of hiring managers who do not like unsolicited resumes being sent direct. So you have to balance that, right? Like maybe I never would have seen this position with XYZ Corp that this recruiter reached out to me with, but maybe I don't want to be ruled out instantly. So you have to kind of weigh these factors and decide, do I want to let them try to represent me and maybe talk to them or get a rapport with them, see how professional like they are. Um, and that may help you get a comfort level with whether or not you want them to attempt to represent you. That's step one. Step two, right? If they say, okay, we do in fact have a contract with this company, we are officially, you want to know to whom are they submitting resumes? Are they, and the second part of that is, and how are they submitting those resumes, right? So there's a couple different ways this can work. One, they could be submitting the resumes directly to the hiring manager. That's a best case scenario. If that's happening, you're jumping the line on people who are applying online and going into talent acquisition or a hiring portal, right? And you're getting your resume probably looked at right away by that hiring manager because, again, he or she should not be receiving too many resumes for that role. That's the goal, right? That you wouldn't be having 15, 20, 30 resumes in front of a manager. So that would be the gold standard, right? If, yes, we have a contract. Yes, we submit directly to the hiring manager. That's your ideal situation for a permanent position. Now, one question that I've had candidates ask me, um, and I do touch on it briefly in the book, but really they say, well, why would I want you to represent me to this client if I could just go apply online myself, right? You're charging them a fee. I'm a more expensive person, candidate, hire, however you want to look at it. If I go to you, Mr. Agency Recruiter, Why wouldn't I or shouldn't I just go apply my own? Well, it's a fair question. Um, the answer is if I'm working directly with the hiring manager, that's why, right? I can get you in front of the hiring manager without going through the hiring portal, without having to go through talent acquisition and a big stack of resumes, and who knows if you'll even get seen. So that's the biggest reason that you would want to consider going through the agency versus trying to apply on your own. There's also just the ethics of it, right? If an agency brings you a role that you had no idea existed, there's also sort of the ethical, moral point of, do I want to cut them out of the loop? They were the ones who brought me the job in the first place. And that's something you'll have to decide on your own. But if that recruiter is working directly with the hiring manager, go for it. I would. It's going to be much better. And I'm not just saying this as an agency recruiter, although that's what I am, but it is going to be much better for you. You're going to go right to the hiring manager. You're going to have a much better chance of that manager actually seeing your resume. Plus, in that case, the recruiter should have some inside information from that hiring manager that will really help you understand what the job is, what their requirements are, the things that are unwritten in the job description, which you guys have been on the job market. I've been doing this for 25 years. Job descriptions are universally poorly written, in my opinion. With and those conversations directly with the hiring managers are really the way that we as recruiters, and that's either could be corporate too, get an understanding of what the job really is beyond a piece of paper. So that's another reason that if an agency recruiter brings a job to you and they're working with a hiring manager, it's worthwhile to pursue it through that agency recruiter. Now, the next question could be, oh, well, we submit to the recruiter in charge of the job. Okay. So now that, and that's fine. That doesn't mean that the job's invalid or that the process won't work. I've placed hundreds of people for talent acquisition. A good question, a good follow-up question to that would be, do you copy the hiring manager on your submittal, or do you submit solely to the recruiter in hopes that they will then forward the resume to the hiring manager? Both cases exist. Both cases can be successful. But again, it's good for you to understand what that looks like so you can balance your chances, right? I would say majority of the time, the hiring manager is copied in on those submittals. So, again, that's going to tell you, A, this agency recruiter has probably talked to the hiring manager or at least been on a call with the hiring manager and the recruiter potentially. Um, they have an understanding of what the job is and they're working directly with that hiring manager, which means they have a motivation to fill the job. The recruiter may just want to be looped in these cases. Sometimes they're driving the process, but they're okay with the manager seeing the resume jump. Um, the third case, well, I guess which would be a half step below this, is if the manager is not being copied on that submittal, and then you'll want to ask some follow-up questions, right? Well, have you talked with the hiring manager? Um, do they know that you're engaged on the search, or um, did you guys get engaged in the search from a relationship with the recruiter? Again, these are fine, but it's going to help you understand how much information it has and the process might go. The fourth and probably worst case scenario in a permanent placement situation is if they're submitting your resume into the talent portal. Um, that means your resume is probably just going in somewhere in that pile of people who've applied for the job. If there is no other contact that happens as a result of that process, that job is probably shaky at best, right? Your chances are really no better than if you just applied on your own. Um, and frankly, this is definitely a minority of the time for at least the jobs that I've worked on in my agency career. We do sometimes have to submit into a portal, but generally speaking, that happens after we've submitted the resume to the recruiter and or hiring manager, and then they ask us, hey, go ahead and submit through the portal or have the candidate apply through the portal um, when they've been submitted. So they know where the resume came from us. That's where the email came in. And then secondly, the candidate got into the portal, got into the process, they're tracked properly in the internal ATS, so on and so forth. I've had all of those processes happen. I've placed candidates in all of the processes. I've never placed a candidate in a flyer type situation, to be perfectly. Um, Honestly, I don't do that very often. Um, and if you want to really pursue that flyer type situation, my recommendation would be to say, well, first get a trust level with the recruiter, right? If you just don't trust them, they seem shady, they can't speak to anything, I just move on. But if you feel like they're being legitimate and upfront and open about most everything, right? They just don't happen to have a contract and they're trying to get one. My recommendation would be say, you know what? I'm fine with us trying this, but how about you take my name, contact information, location off the resume, right? Make it what we call a blind resume and use that to put in front of the manager or recruiter or whomever and see if you can generate some interest that way. That way, if they get back to that recruiter and say, we don't take unsolicited resumes, cease and desist, so to speak, your name is not associated with it, right? Everything was scrubbed. It was a blind resume, and then shouldn't be any problem. And then I would follow up with that recruiter, right? See what's happening. And if they are honest, and you have a decent relationship, and they tell you, hey, they said we can't work on this, we can't get any traction on this position as an external agency. Now you could maybe go apply for the job on your own, right? I mean, that's the other side of that too, is if you haven't given them your name is not in the ATS, it's not in the recruiter's hands. Nobody knows that that was your resume. They may be able to compare it and see, but they're not going to have even kept that blind resume. They're going to have just deleted the email, responded back to the agency. Don't do that, and move on. So that's the way you could approach that situation. That's probably how I would. All right. Does anyone have any questions about the permanent placement side agency recruiting? Um, Throw them up there. I'll keep talking. See if if anything comes in that we can shoot into the conversation here. The other side of this also is salary negotiation, right? Which usually happens in that initial conversation with the recruiter. Um, I will tell you, usually, and a good recruiter should tell you the range, right? The whole like they who speak first loses paradigm that existed 10, 15 years ago, in my opinion, is kind of dead. Like, if they ask you to speak first, just give me a range, right? Um, but give it a range, right? Take it from maybe put your target somewhere in the middle and then bracket it by however many $1,000, and that way you're not hopefully leaving money on the table. The the other side of that is if the recruiter gives you the range first, let's say the range is 100 to 150,000, and you legitimately are okay with 130,000. Well, don't just naturally jump to 150,000 just because the range goes that. And this is where I think there should be a conversation regarding salary in this process, because yes, you want to get as much money as possible, but you also might not want to be the most expensive candidate in the queue, right? So you have to weigh out getting what I want, which is right in the middle of the range, versus maybe leaving a little money on the table versus maybe not having as good a chance at the job because you are the most expensive person submitted. So that's a conversation you need to have with the recruiter, and it really should be a conversation, not a negotiation. Um, I think you need to understand, is this really the range? Are they targeting the midpoint? Sometimes that happens where companies will give a range, but they really don't want to pay the top, and the recruiter should know that. That's a good question to ask to understand, are they really going to pay the top of the range? If that's what you want, and that's what they're offering, but will they really pay it? Um, Understanding that. And then the other question is, how many other candidates are submitted, right? They won't be able to tell you what their competition is submitted, but they should be able to tell you how many candidates they've submitted, and it should only be, right, 5, 6 maybe. I mean, no agency should be submitting 10, 20 candidates for a job. That tells you that they're probably not the greatest agency in the world. So if you ask that question and they give you an answer, you could say, okay, well, what salary ranges are they falling in? And then you could try to get some understanding of where you are competitively with the other candidates who are in the market for this job. Now, again, you won't know what the competitors are doing. Are there two, three, four, 10 other candidates being submitted? It's a good idea to ask, right? How many other agencies are working this rec if you know how much competition? I can tell you for at least some of my clients, probably more than half, I have a pretty good idea of how many competitors I have with that manager. So those are things that those are really good questions that you can ask to try to help understand your place in that market, and then what you might do to position yourself better. Let me look at a couple of these questions. I did see a couple came in here. Yeah, Trevor asked, he's trying to get in front of AI companies, and he starts reaching out to recruiters, sending CV, patents, intellectual property, um, and most usually doesn't hear back. And the few that respond say it's overwhelming and they don't know what to do with it. I think, in my opinion, Trevor, you might be over, um, like, yeah, I don't know. I know in the love bombing, right? In the dating world, you might be going a little hard at first. I might back that down a little bit into a CV, and then maybe a narrative, right? Kind of, I hate the word cover letter because people don't like them, but like an email in place of a cover letter that kind of just briefly touches on your capabilities, the patents, different things that you're bringing to the table, but not be overwhelming in the information. Um, the other question I would have, I mean, I hope you're doing it via email and not in mail. In mail's terrible. It's buried. We all are getting, hammered by lots and lots of in mails trying to sell us stuff, trying to generate interest. So do it via direct email, which you can find a variety of plugins. AI can tell you if you just ask it what the email convention is for company X. Generally, it'll spit out some pretty good results. And then I think your next best bet is if you can figure out who that position might report to, or who, if there's not an open position, you're just trying to get in front of them, who you would report to in a general sense. That person's going to know a lot more what to do with those details than the recruiter is, right? The recruiter doesn't understand half of that stuff. They're trying to get through this as quickly as they can and get resumes in the right place. The hiring manager is going to understand more your capabilities and your patents, I think. So if you're able to write to those people directly, again, direct email, I think that might yield you a lot better results. All right, David had a question here. Right to represent with a recruiting company, 8-month gig. The hourly rate's 25% below market. Um, because of the layers. David said he thinks it could be because of the layers. We've got the company he's working with, the company who holds the contract, the end client, right? That happens a lot, actually, David. It probably does explain some of why the rate's low. Although I will also say rates have been pushed down a lot over the last 2 years. Um, that's really what I've seen is even when there are layers, the rates started out lower than that anyway, right? It really wasn't going to be a very competitive rate. So I think you want to ask, okay, you know, who who holds the contract, right? You want to make sure hopefully there's not like a third layer. How many layers are removed between you and the client? I think you want to know, does the whoever has the contract work directly with a hiring manager, or is it through an MSP? That's a whole nother section in my book, and I'll probably get to on the next slide, is dealing with agency recruiters for contract positions. That'll take me another 30 minutes to go over that. So we'll get to that one next. But I would definitely try to find out how many layers there are, what the ultimate relationship is between the um, contract holder and the hiring manager, are they involved? Do they speak? Do they not speak? The other thing you could ask is if the company that recruited you would allow you to work directly with the next layer up and pay a referral fee. So we do that actually quite often because we prefer to have our consultants on a W-2 if possible. But if we're working with a partner, we're not cutting them out. That's not the way we do things, but we will negotiate an hourly, cut to give them as kind of a referral fee or a finder's fee, so to speak, on the contract. A lot of times that can mean that you might get a little better money. I don't think it always works out a lot better. You may end up with the same rate anyway, but you are getting one step closer to the person holding that um, contract with the client by you're not cutting out the bottom layer, but by removing up and engaging with that next layer. I don't know if that makes sense. Um, David, you can reach out to me after this tomorrow, and we could go through this more if you want to. It is a little bit complicated, but it's not an illegitimate process. We do have sub vendors that we work with sometimes. We hold the ultimate contract. Sometimes we're a sub vendor to a company that holds the ultimate contract. It depends on a lot of different things, and it can be a complicated process for sure. Jeff asked this. There seems to be an ongoing debate about the open to work tag. So I assume Jeff, you're talking about the green banner. In my mind, there's not much of it. There shouldn't be a debate, let's say. It's fine to have it up. There might be some people who think that it's desperate or shows desperation. That whole thing was started by one guy who was a recruiter at Google for like a year and a half and did an interview with somebody who said, ex Google recruiter says green banner makes you seem desperate, right? This literally is where this entire debate spun up from. And I'm not sure why it got legs. I mean, ex Google recruiter, right? Um, Most recruiters I talk to and hiring managers really don't care. Um, I think you could treat it as a test, right? Toggle it on, see if you get any people reaching out to you, see if it triggers anybody from your network who you haven't talked with in a while who might say, hey, I didn't know you were looking. I've got a job open, or we might be hiring. I actually had somebody I know get an offer that way. He was reluctant to turn the green banner on and finally did. The other thing, then you toggle it off and see if you get better results from people reaching out to you. You could treat it like a kind of like a test case. That would be the way I would do it. Personally, I don't think it makes much of a difference. Just make sure you do check open to work in the open to work settings. That's regardless of the banner, and you want that on so that in the back end of LinkedIn Recruiter, when we're sourcing, we know that you're open to work. It's a filter, and if I click open to work, filter out everybody who only has said open to work, and you don't have that checked, you will not show up in my results. So absolutely make sure you turn that on. Again, the green banner is not tied to that in any way, so you can kind of take that one or leave it. I think I got time for one more question here. Libby said, how to write my LinkedIn profile if the last 3 roles were very short tenure, but everything prior is impressive. So you can sort of create a consultant or freelance job, call yourself what you were, right? And then underneath that, detail out those 3 engagements, any dates on them. You can just put the overall date range as your job at freelance. And then detail out everything that you had there. Make sure that title that you give yourself, you're freelance, so you can call yourself whatever you want. Make sure that aligns with the jobs you're going after and probably the jobs you had before. And now that's going to bring those next 2 titles and dates of employment, by the way, up into the most recent ones that people see. And so then it also won't show short tenures one right after the other in the most recent 3 jobs. I hope that makes sense to you guys. And Libby, if you want to reach out to me tomorrow to get some clarification, I'm happy to try to help you out with that as well. All right, guys, we've hit 30 minutes. think I've covered pretty much everything in the perm placement section of the secrets part of my book. Um, as I've said before, please, please reach out to me. I would love to try to help you out and answer any questions you might have. And I really appreciate you guys joining the LinkedIn. I'm getting better at the technology, right? Next time, it's getting smoother and smoother. And hopefully, I'll see you guys next time, and we'll talk about another part from the secrets. We're going to go over dealing with contract agency recruiters and what questions to ask, go about handling that aspect of the job search, and that's a whole another ball of wax. Thanks a lot, guys.